This video will describe the War of the Pacific, also known as the Saltpeter and Nitrate War, which were resources the world needed for military and economic expansion. Fighting started in 1879 with a marine campaign and continued with a land invasion until 1883, and Chile seemed to adhere to its coat of arms motto, doing things by reason or by force, against the Allies Peru and Bolivia. This cartoon depicts Presidents Daza and Prado watching the Chilean Pinto trimming a chunk of Bolivia, whilst the Argentinian president holds the territory, aiding the Chilean actions. The circle in this map shows the area of conflict, and the expanded view shows the Bolivian province of Antofagasta and the Peruvians of Tarapacá, Arica and Tacna. On the right, the elongated actual Chilean territory is composed of pre-war and post-war lands. The causes leading to the war were due to unresolved colonial territorial boundaries and the discovery of commodities like guano, an excellent organic fertilizer, and nitrates on saltpeter, used extensively as an ingredient for gunpowder. In 1857, Chile, under President Bulnes, invaded, and in 1863 still occupies Mejillones in Bolivia, which is the area of guano deposits. The Bolivian Congress then authorized a war with Chile to recover the occupied land, and since the country needed funds to arm itself, President Acha sent Mr. Avelino Aramayo, the miner, to London with the intention of seeking a loan from the firm Pito and Betts to buy 2 armored warships. But in 1864, Spain captures the Guano, Chincha Islands from Peru, and this sparks a South American Union movement against the old colonial power, led by Benjamin Vicuña Mackenna and Isidoro Errázuriz. The previous land conflict and war with Chile is postponed because of a general South American solidarity against Spain and assurances of good intentions by Chile to Bolivia. Later, in 1864, precisely on the 28th of December, a day equivalent there to April's Fool's Day, Mariano Melgarejo, by a coup d'etat, deposed President Acha. This new president did not care about the warships, so Mr. Aramayo's deal was ignored. It all resulted in no Ironclad warships for Bolivia. In 1866, instead of going to war, Bolivia and Chile signed a boundary treaty and set an area of condominium, due to a clever manipulation of Melgarejo's government and Congress by his close friend Aniceto Vergara Albano, the Chilean ambassador. Therefore, a joint area of exploitation of guano and nitrates between the 23rd and 25th parallels south was created. The zone of condominium lies between the 23rd and 25th parallels. The area of coastal guano deposits start in Antofagasta near parallel 24th and extends north into Peruvian location. The nitrate and saltpeter deposits occupied the arid lands between parallels 24 and 18. The ascending arrows on the left show the Chilean border at different times, starting in 1828 as the colonial pre-independence at parallel 27. By 1841, Chile argued and advanced his territory from the Copiapó to the Paposo River. The Treaty of 1866 gave Chile working rights up to parallel 23, and by the end of the war, Chile had moved to parallel 18. In 1868, a boom in nitrates started in the Atacama region. In 1870, Melgarejo, nicknamed the Bolivian Beast, was in turn ejected from power. His treaties were revised or cancelled, and the new incoming government hoped to revise the terms of the 1866 treaty and thus abolish the condominium. In 1873, Peru and Bolivia signed a secret treaty of alliance, and on the 24th of September, the Argentine President Sarmiento asked his Chamber of Deputies to add Argentina to the alliance. The Argentine Chamber assented by a vote of 48 to 18. However, in 1874, after the delivery of the Ironclads Cochrane and Blanco Encalada to Chile by Earl Shipbuilding Company from Hull, Yorkshire, the Argentine Senate postponed the matter until late 1874, and President Sarmiento was prevented signing the treaty. Also, to avoid fighting against Argentina, President Pinto from Chile authorized his negotiators to hand over as much territory as was needed to prevent Argentina siding with Bolivia and Peru. Consequently, Argentina remained neutral during the war and signed a border treaty with Chile in 1881, dividing the Atlantic and Pacific watersheds. Argentina had taken advantage of Chile's conflict to push for a favorable boundary in Patagonia. But by 1874, different interpretations of the 1866 Treaty of Condominium complicated diplomatic relations with Bolivia. So Chile relinquished its rights to the Condominium Treaty for a 25-year concession on the exploitation of nitrates in Antofagasta without payment of tax. The Nitrite Company of Antofagasta had a myriad of saltpeter works, from parallel 19 south to 24, and three principal owners: Agustin Edwards, the predominant banker of Chile; Francisco Puelma, with Santos Osa as initiators of the works; and Anthony Gibbs and Son, otherwise known as the Guano King. Later, in 1878, other 12 Chilean citizens acquired shares in the company, all names from the most prominent families in the Republic of Chile. In Tarapacá, the Peruvian nitrate monopoly was a state-owned enterprise operated by the Peruvian Nitrate Company. Chilean-British capital was matched by Peruvian resources 50-50. A big difference with the situation in Antofagasta, where a foreign enclave, isolated from the Bolivian government, owned all, 100% to zero. A state within a state. Yet, while those business concerns were doing well, Bolivia was battered by natural disasters like cholera, earthquake, floods. The country had little assets to attend to its citizens' needs, and President Daza hit on an idea for raising money. So, in 1878, Bolivia decided to impose a tax on the nitrate workings in Antofagasta, and Chile argued this contravened the 1874 treaty that gave working rights at Parallel 24. This action sparked the Pacific War. The Bolivian government proposed to enforce a tax of 0.35 pounds per ton, or 10 Bolivian cents per 100 kilograms, and in December presented George Hicks, the general manager of the company, with a bill for 90,000 pesos. Hicks refused to pay, so Severino Zapata, administering the province of Atacama, and the prefect ordered his arrest and the confiscation of all stocks from the Saltpeter Company of Antofagasta. The Chilean ambassador, Videla, tried to submit the question to mediation. But on the same day, President Pinto ordered the warships Blanco Encalada and Cochrane and O'Higgins to Antofagasta. The date of usurpation seems to have been marked in advance, as the special envoy of Chile in La Paz had reported the rupture of relations on February the 12th. Since the Saltpeter Company refused to pay the tax, the Bolivian government threatened to seize and auction all the stocks of the company. So, on the 14th of February 1879, the same day that all the effects of the Saltpeter and Nitrate Company of Antofagasta were going to be auctioned, the Chilean Navy disembarked in Antofagasta. Was this gunboat diplomacy, the dominant way to attain expansion of empire? Colonel Emilio Sotomayor, plus 500 armed men, composed the invasion force that without opposition captured Antofagasta. The picture shows Chilean troops in Antofagasta. And then, upon discovering there was no resistance by Bolivian forces, Sotomayor advanced to the Caracoles station during the following day. Since Bolivia had no telegraph, the news of the invasion was received at the Bolivian consulate in Arica on the 20th of February, and immediately relayed to La Paz by an indigenous courier who arrived there on February the 25th, which was Tuesday of Carnival, when President Daza and his cabinet were given free rein to celebrations. All local Bolivian fighting efforts were in vain, as the Chilean advance soon took possession of their entire coastline, The fleet transported troops and occupied the ports of Mejillones, Cobija, Guanillos, and Tocopilla. Consequently, a Bolivian presidential decree on March 1, 1879, demanded the expulsion of Chileans, the nationalizing of Chilean private property, and prohibited trade and communications with Chile as long as the war lasts. Hence, rather than negotiate a settlement with President Daza, Pinto used the recently disclosed 1873 secret defensive alliance pact between Peru and Bolivia as a pretext to declare war on both countries. The Chilean cartoon depicts the weight of the Allied presidents not able to counteract the Chilean military might, since Avellaneda has not tipped the balance in the Allies' favour. Chile, in this way, gained a territory rich in nitrates, saltpeter, and copper. Its national treasury grew by 900% between the years 1879 and 1902, due to taxes from the acquired Bolivian and Peruvian lands. The cornerstone of Chilean imperial identity was whiteness, a racial category far beyond phenotype. Peru and Bolivia's Creoles, Mestizos, Indians and Chinese, in contrast, were seen as racially degenerate, with inferiority measured in terms of laziness and backwardness. The key figure in the articulation of this racial discourse was Benjamin Vicuña Mackenna, of Irish and Basque descent, a presidential candidate that lost the contests to Errázuriz and represented the intellectual class of the Chilean landed elites. When war broke out, he tried to discredit Bolivian actions and behavior with the intention of dividing Bolivian public opinion and justifying the military invasion to help the Chilean cause. The various arms, characters and episodes of the war were the land and sea weapons, the war leaders, the marine battles, the land battles at Tarapacá, Tacna and Arica, and in Lima at Chorrillos and Miraflores. The Chilean Navy was composed of two main ironclads, Almirante Cochrane and Blanco Encalada, both fitted with a ramming end. The other wooden vessels were the Magallanes, O'Higgins, Chacabuco, Aptao, Esmeralda, and Covadonga. The Chilean Navy first took to the seas in 1818, under the command of the Scotsman Lord Thomas Cochrane, to liberate Peru and Bolivia from Spanish rule, and many of his officers remained in the Chilean Navy. This explains the presence of so many sailors with English surnames in the Chilean fleet. And some officers even sired a second generation of Chilean naval officers. Chile's newest and most powerful warships were British built and fitted with coal-fired engines and masts. Juan Williams Rebolledo was the Anglo-Chilean commander who had trained with the British Navy and supervised the seizure of Antofagasta. Rebolledo's political masters urged him to blockade the Peruvian fleet while it lay at anchor in Callao. He rejected the suggestion so as not to risk his ships against the impressive coastal artillery batteries of Callao. The Peruvian Navy also had two ironclads. Huasca was its main ironclad, and Independencia was the second one. The other vessels were the Manco Cápac, the Atahualpa, Unión, Pilcomayo, wooden ships, and two torpedo boats. A pamphlet in Lima described Peru's fleet as the best organized and disciplined of the entire Pacific. Since the ironclad Huasca had new boilers and its engines had been worked on, Peru considered it was in perfect condition. And Miguel Grau, Peru's preeminent naval figure, received much of his training in the merchant navy, and almost all the sailors that manned the warships seemed to lack the necessary skill to maneuver them. Miguel Grau, as captain of the Huasca, was the most renowned Peruvian naval officer and hero of the Battle of Angamos during the War of the Pacific. At the age of 11, he enlisted in the Merchant Marine. In 1854, was a midshipman. In 1863, was second lieutenant. And when war erupted, he relinquished his congressional seat and returned to active service to lead the fleet, well aware of the poor condition of the vessels. Peru even purchased the Ley torpedo for the war, which was powered by a gas engine, driven by compressed carbon dioxide and steered by impulses. It proved unreliable the majority of the time. One of the Ley torpedoes, fired from the Huasca at a Chilean ship, after halfway there, turned around and came back to the mothership at 15 knots, despite frantic efforts by the operator. Eventually, it had to be deflected by a swimmer. Up to 1878, Bolivia had a war fleet. But by 1879, its ships no longer flew the Bolivian tricolour, and purchase of the two London armoured warships was just a distant memory. The government in La Paz hoped to participate in the naval war without a single ship at sea. The president offered letters of marque, but the Treaty of Paris outlawed privateering. On this point, Bolivia argued it had the right to use these methods, but the USA, England and France refused to recognize the legality of the action. Eventually, reason prevailed and the act did not take place. The weapons used were mostly rifles, like the Gras, the Beaumont, the Winchester, the Tercerola Remington, and the Comblain, which had a selection of bayonet sabres. There were also Colt revolvers and a knife, particularly used by the Chileans, called the Corver, which got a very bad reputation. They also used machine guns like the Gatling gun and cannons like the Krupp. The Allies used breech-loading rifles, cannons, remote-controlled landmines and naval torpedoes, but both Peru and Bolivia had severe ammunition and logistical problems. Bolivia purchased its supplies from third parties and received ammunition of dubious caliber that tended to jam their assortment of rifles. But the performance of the Allied officers was very bad, and some of their generals distinguished themselves by running away from danger. In contrast to the lack of preparations for the officers of Bolivia and Peru, the Chilean men received their training at the O'Higgins Academy from European-educated military men. The presidents of Bolivia, Peru and Chile at the start of the conflict were Hilarión Daza for Bolivia, Mariano Prado first and then Nicolás Piera by the coup d'etat for Peru, and Aníbal Pinto for Chile. It was Hilarión Daza who imposed the 10% tax, and it was Aníbal Pinto who sent the warships to Antofagasta. The initial war operations started with the occupation of Antofagasta and the blockade of Bolivian ports. It was mentioned earlier how the Bay of Mejillones was invaded by Chile in 1857, when the ship Esmeralda disembarked its troops. War was declared later in 1863, but never took place. Again, in 1879, Emilio Sotomayor invades the city of Antofagasta. A small number of civilian Bolivian defenders flee to Calama, where they are easily defeated by Chilean forces. The only Bolivian hero of the Pacific War is immortalized by this statue in the square of La Paz. The picture shows some of the civilian defenders captured at Calama by the Chilean forces, and they revealed the poor extent of Bolivian defenses. The information helped the Chilean army to launch an attack that captured the town. And the Chilean army of occupation soon took possession of the entire Bolivian coastline. After the naval invasion and taking of Antofagasta by Sotomayor, the Chilean fleet under Williams Rebolledo captured the Bolivian ports of Mejillones, Cobija, Tocopilla and Guanillos. The Chilean Navy even blockaded Iquique, and they destroyed all the loading equipment at that port to stop the Peruvian nitrate export. The first naval encounter was on the 12th of April, when the corvette Magallanes was sailing towards Iquique. The Peruvian corvette Unión and the gunboat Pilcomayo were searching for the Copiapó, but instead found the Magallanes. The two ships attacked the Magallanes with crossfire, and since the Pilcomayo developed boiler problems and dropped out of the chase, the speed of the Magallanes allowed it to escape. The Peruvian fleet was assembled at Callao, whilst the Chilean fleet was south near Iquique, and the Abtao guarded that port. On the 15th of May, the Peruvian fleet started moving southwards, and on the same day, the Chilean fleet sailed northwards, leaving the Covadonga and Esmeralda to guard Iquique. On the 21st of May, the two fleets crossed at sea, and this led to the first marine battles. In these battles, the Huasca first sinks the Esmeralda, and later the Covadonga leads the Independencia to the rocks. Miguel Grau, captain of the Ironclad Huasca, sank the Esmeralda. The image shows the ramming of the Esmeralda, a wooden steam corvette that earlier in 1857, under Captain Anacleto Goñi, invaded Mejillones. The ram opened a hole in the hull, and the vessel took nearly 4 hours to sink. With the Independencia in hot pursuit, Condell used the shallow draft of his vessel and lured the Ironclad to the rocks where it ran aground. The Chilean, Carlos Condell, captain of the Covadonga, became a hero. It was Captain Moore on the Independencia trying to ram the Covadonga that on his third attempt struck an obstacle and took on water while listing to starboard. Then the Huasca drove off the Chilean ship, loaded Independencia's crew aboard, and blew up the wreck to prevent her capture. But the rebellious William Rebolledo was replaced by Rear Admiral Galvarino Riveros as fleet commander, and he received orders to attack, capture, and destroy or sink the Huasca wherever it be found. Intelligence revealed the Huasca was steaming south together with the Union. So, Riveros divided his fleet into two components, the first with La Torre and the Cochrane, and the second composed the Blanco Encalada with himself as commander, and the other slower ships would sail 50 miles ahead. Williams Rebolledo is replaced by Riveros, and on the 1st of October, the Chilean fleet divides its forces into two components. Later, on the 8th of October, as the Huasca and the Union are sailing for Arica, the Huasca is trapped between the Blanco Encalada and the Cochrane that attack and capture it. By the 8th of December, the Huasca becomes a Chilean trophy, handed over by Riveros to President Pinto in the Chilean cartoon. The images show the attack and explosions on the Huasca. Captain Grau is killed on the bridge and his ship captured by Chile. After boarding, Simpson, the Chilean engineer, saved the Huasca from being sunk by closing the sea valves. Chile now has command of all the sea lanes, a key turning point in the war as the Peruvian forces were unable to prevent the subsequent invasions into its territory by Chile. Chile then considered capture of the Peruvian land as the next step. With such purpose, the Chilean fleet, with the Cochrane, O'Higgins, Magallanes and Covadonga, opened fire at the coastal positions of Pisagua, and Patricia Lynch, with 9 steam transports, 9,500 troops and 850 animals, on the 2nd of November 1879, launched a decisive attack at Pisagua. Meanwhile, in conjunction with Lynch, Sotomayor lands 2 fronts at Junín that move to Pisagua from the rear. The land battles then begin, first at Dolores and later at Tarapacá. At this stage, Presidents Daza and Prado, after the naval defeat and landing at Pisagua, meet in Tacna to plan joint action with General Buendia's army in the south. President Daza and 3,000 troops should march 62 miles south to Tana, but 3 days later, unexpectedly, Daza fled to Arica. The desertion of the Bolivian army under Hilarión Daza, this president, was known as the Camarones betrayal. Meanwhile, General Buendía in the south, with 9,000 men in 3 columns, was waiting instructions to march 55 miles north to link up with Daza's army. After 8 days waiting for Daza, Buendía moved further north. And at the same time, Sotomayor prepared to defend the wells at Dolores. Buendía assumed Allied command and was received by heavy artillery fire when he reached Dolores, because the Chileans attacked with heavy artillery. And when General Escala arrives, he finds Dolores taken. The Bolivian officers try to contain the retreat of their soldiers, which fled in all directions. The same happened with the Peruvian cavalry that flanked, and troops also fled. Yet the Chilean army didn't pursue the soldiers, believing that the real fight would take place next day. General Buendía escaped from Dolores to Tarapacá. The attacking army of Colonel Arteaga carried insufficient amounts of food, water and ammunition, and also marched for 30 hours across burning sands with little rest. This severely diminished its fighting capabilities. Colonel Arteaga realized that the only salvation was to attack quickly, thinking his enemy was in bad condition. The Peruvian forces sight the Chileans, so their attack is not a surprise. The Chilean position becomes desperate, and they retreat short of munition. By 3:30 in the afternoon, Peru advances and wins. But the victory doesn't last long. Because later, without reinforcements or supplies, Peru's forces are forced to flee Tarapacá. It is a 195-mile trek by the desert route back to Arica. This episode proved to be an odyssey for the Peruvian army, and Buendía in Arica has to explain his actions and faces court-martial. Finally, Buendía is struck from the officers' ranks and dismissed. By the end of 1879, Chile had captured all the nitrate works from Bolivia and Peru and dominated the sea lanes. While the defeats at Pisagua and Dolores forced both presidents Daza and Prado from power. And then Chile focused its attack on the cities of Tacna and Arica. A landing force left Pisagua, aiming to land at Ilo. 3 divisions of the Chilean army disembarked at Ilo and advanced from there south to Tacna. "10,000 men were unshipped at Ilo, and they took control of the town and severed the telegraphic lines. At the battleground in Tacna, the 4 Chilean divisions under General Baquedano's command were assembled on the west ground under the leaders Amengual, Barceló, and Barbosa. The Allies had 3 leaders. The Bolivian President General Narciso Campero assumed command, with Montero and Camacho for Peru, and they had the advantage of the high ground on the east. The Allied plan relied on taking tactical advantage of the terrain, but they neither prepared any defences nor dug any trenches. After an hour's fighting, the Chileans captured the second line of Allied defences. The 3rd Chilean Division advanced at a fast trot and struck Camacho's left, whose units had to retreat. Within hours, the Allied resistance collapsed, and the troops and officers fled to Tacna, where an angry mob chased them down the streets. As a result, Bolivia was knocked out of the war, leaving Peru to fight the rest of the war alone. Later, Tacna was shelled in order to force the surrender, and finally Colonel Santiago Amengual, entered the city around 1830. The Chilean Colonel Pedro Lagos launched a giant assault on Arica with more than 8,000 Chileans from sea and land. The Peruvian forces had little choice but to wait for the attack on their defences. The fort and the Manco Capac exchanged fire with the Chilean fleet as Chile's land forces attacked the entrenchments. The city of Arica never returned to Peruvian hands. After Tacna's defeat, the Arica garrison lost communications with the army in retreat, so General Baquedano suggested to Colonel Bolognesi that he should surrender, but the man refused. Colonel Bolognesi's plan was to blow up his gunpowder reserves when the Chileans reached the fort and cause massive casualties. But General Lagos launched a ferocious attack, and Bolognesi died firing a pistol to a Chilean soldier who literally cleaved his skull in two. The final battles of Lima took place in the suburbs, at Chorrillos and then Miraflores, as the Chilean army moved northwards against the 4 Peruvian divisions headed by Iglesias, Cáceres, Suárez, and Dávila. The defeat at Tarapacá should have made Pierola, the new president, carefully consider further fighting. But Pierola, nicknamed El Loco de Lima or Lima's Looney, chose instead to continue with the struggle, promising to resist to the last bullet. He was convinced that Chilean troops would disembark at Ancón, north of Lima, and so his defences concentrated in that area. The Chilean northward advance and land capture that started with Antofagasta continued at Tarapacá, Tacna and Arica. But it did not stop there, as a landing at Pisco was proposed to continue towards Lima, the Peruvian capital. "400 infantry and artillery men landed at Pisco and learned that 3,000 Peruvian soldiers garrisoned the town. Under fire from the Chileans' fleet's guns, panic dominated everything, and men of the garrison, rather than fight, flunked. Once in Pisco, the army's plan was to move overland and attack Lima. President Pierola organized his forces to defend the capital by waiting to fight there, rather than move to meet the enemy. Yet his first 14 kilometers of defenses that started at Morro del Solar in Chorrillos were, in strategic terms, badly designed and conceived. Pierola's Peruvian force was composed of 4 divisions, headed by Miguel Iglesias, Pastor Dávila, Andrés Cáceres, and Belisario Suárez. But General Baquedano's plan consisted in attacking at once along the entire front line, exploiting the fact that the defensive line was extensive but thin. This image shows the 1st, 2nd and 3rd Divisions of the Chilean Army positioned on the east, and how Lynch's 1st Division launches the attack at Morro del Solar. The Peruvian divisions of Iglesias, Cáceres and Dávila wait positioned with the artillery and infantry divisions behind the extensive defense line. The attacking Black Arrows show how the 2nd and 3rd Chilean divisions breach the defenses and get to San Juan, where the main battle takes place. The defensive line was fractured in 2 points, and the battle was turning in Chile's favor. For 3 hours, the 4th Unit of the Peruvian Army combated without stoppages, but all was in vain. Finally, the Peruvians abandoned their positions in disorder and retreated towards Miraflores. The picture represents the Chilean charge during the Battle of San Juan. Patricio Lynch, with other officers, managed to capture the high ground and took more than 1,000 prisoners. But by 2 p.m., Emilio Sotomayor's men controlled San Juan, and by late afternoon, the Chileans had vanquished their foes at Chorrillos. For the final battle at Miraflores, the extensive Peruvian line of defense, seen here in red, stretches for 7 kilometers and has mine fields in front. And Nicolas Pierola reshuffled the survivors of Chorrillos and the reservists behind his defenses. At the same time, the Chilean battleships began to fire shells, trying to help the land forces. Then Chile's troops started moving towards the defenses, and General Lagos ordered the 5th Regiment to catch Cáceres in a pincer maneuver, while the rest of the brigade were to hit the Peruvians with a frontal charge. After the last defeat, whilst willing to negotiate peace terms with Nicolas Pierola, General Baquedano demanded the dictator should surrender Callao and abandon Miraflores. The naval chiefs were trying to convince Pierola about a truce, when suddenly a shot was heard. The Peruvian retreat became a rout, and 90 minutes later, the Chileans had overrun Pierola's lines. Lima's defenders confronted a 21,000 better equipped, trained and led Chileans with their 88 artillery pieces. Finally, General Baquedano ordered his troops to set fire to Miraflores. As the Chilean army prepared to enter Lima, Nicolas Pierola left the capital for the interior, and from the Andes continued his guerrilla war for another 3 years. Then, on the 22nd of January 1881, the first Chilean troops entered Lima. Patricio Javier de los Dolores Lynch de Saldívar became Lima's Chilean ruler. The resentment against Chileans grew, but Lynch, called the last viceroy of Peru, ruled until 1884, and the Chinese indentured slave laborers he liberated from their haciendas called him the Red Prince because of his red hair. In 1883, the Treaty of Ancon, a peace treaty, was signed with Chile, by which Peru ceded Tarapacá to Chile, but Tacna and Arica were held for 10 years pending a referendum to decide their fate. It never took place. In 1884, Bolivia signed an indefinite truce with Chile, not a peace treaty, and has to negotiate an agreement without his ally, a betrayal of the alliance pact with Peru. Later, in 1903, Chile and Argentina, after a long-standing border dispute and armament race, signed the Pactos de Mayo to end their confrontation. This action allows Chile freedom to deal with Bolivia, giving away little for all the territorial gains. The clauses of the 1903 Pactos de Mayo stated: 1. That Argentina renounces to intervene in the Chilean affairs in the Pacific Ocean, and Santiago promises not to intrude east of the Andes. 2. The Arms Control Treaty states that Chile and Argentina are to sell off warships they had under construction in Europe and disarm some ships already in service. And 3, there was an agreement to ask Edward VII to arbitrate the demarcation because tensions and near state of war caused the British to push for a resolution, lest their economic interest in the region be disrupted. In 1904, a truce with Bolivia becomes a peace treaty. Now, with a possible war with Argentina averted, Bolivia is offered a deal that grants only access to the coast by a proposed railway and a monetary compensation with guarantees for free commerce. These are some of the books that tell the story in greater detail. Andean Tragedy is available as print on demand. Some of the others are available at various booksellers.